Welcome to Communicology. I'm Richard Talbert. I'm an associate professor of communication and media, and I love studying how people communicate. I also love learning how communication and culture intersect. Today, I'd like to cover something a little different. We're going to talk about the idea of nonverbal communication. Now, why do we talk about nonverbal communication? Well, it's quite simple. It's the vast majority of what we do. As the saying goes, you cannot not communicate. We are always communicating. Even if I sit in silence, I'm communicating something, whether it's the way I'm sitting, the way I'm moving my face, the way I'm moving my hands, and all the other things that go on that inside the space of communication. If you think about it, the bulk of what we do is not actually speaking, and when we do speak, we're still adding nonverbal cues to it. Depending on the researcher you study, it could be 70%, 80%, or even 90% of the communication that we do is nonverbal, which means we spend so much of our time, the vast majority of our time, communicating without saying a single word. And so what I like to do is talk about several different aspects of nonverbal communication to help us understand, what do I mean when I'm saying nonverbal communication? Because I can understand some basic things like the way I move my hands or things like that, but what else is entailed? Because there are multiple layers. So let's talk about those each as we go through. So this will be a quick overview. It's not going to be a very in-depth discussion of each one, and that's something that we can look into at a later time. So let's take a peek at what we mean by nonverbal communication. The first one is fairly obvious, and that's facial expressions. You can tell by looking at someone's face. You see them coming, and you can tell if they're happy. You can tell if they're sad. You can tell if they're angry. You can tell if they're having a great day. You can tell if something's just not quite right. Maybe if they're sick, maybe they're in pain. You can kind of tell that in the face. So you think of all the different ways that people can move their cheeks, their mouth, their eyes, their eyebrows to show the kind of different levels of awareness. This was one of the things that was very difficult to deal with when it came time for COVID, because everyone had to wear face masks, and that covers the vast majority of your face. So it became hard to tell, like, is this person smiling? I can't tell. Is this person frowning? I can't tell. And, we're so used to reading facial cues that as soon as most of it's covered over with a mask, we found out really quickly that we're actually kind of poor at reading nonverbal cues once we take away something as basic as just the mouth and the cheeks. So now, with the masks gone, we can get back into the idea of, well, okay, now I can see your face. Let's try to figure out what this person's thinking and what this person means. And it could be something as very simple as a smile or sticking out a tongue, all kinds of these things that we do with our facial expressions that we help, let people know what we're thinking, and without even saying a word. Now, where it gets difficult is someone has a poor resting face. Like, I know that if I sit there, my mouth downturns, and I look sometimes like I'm not happy or I'm angry. And I've had people come up to me and say, why are you so upset? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm having a great day. It's like, your face says otherwise. And when I got my first driver's license and I looked at the picture, I could see why people thought that, because my resting face doesn't look very happy. It looks very angry, actually. So I had to learn to, when I'm in situations, especially social situations with other people around, to kind of force myself to smile at least a little bit, just to show that I'm not mad. Just relax, I'm not mad. So I had to basically learn how to adjust my resting face so I was portraying the right information. So that's one thing, facial expressions. The next one is closely related, and that's what's known as oculics. Oculics are interesting. If you're not sure where that comes from, you can break down the root of it and discover that's communication with your eyes. So when I think about eyes and what I do with my eyes, I can wink, I can blink, I can do all kinds of flirty moves. I can do all kinds of things I want to do with my eyes. And we can tell, you've got lying eyes, or whatever the thing happens to be. And, whenever you're a little kid and you're in trouble and you start looking away and mom's like, look at me when I talk to you. Well, again, because we can tell a lot from people with their eyes. Now, this is one area with COVID that we actually learned to do really well, because again, if I cover my face with a mask, that's what's left. And we learned really quickly that, oh, I can see the way your eyes, just these slight details. I can tell you're smiling. Why? Because I can see like this area start to crease up, which we typically do when we smile. And so we started to learn to read the cues of just the eyes. So oculics is one of those things that we learned actually really well. We improved the ability to read people's faces thanks to oculics, again, during that time of masking. But now in this era, we've gone back to the whole face, but still the eyes still carry so much weight. And I always joke with my students that my favorite is the wink, because the wink can mean so much and it can mean so many different things. It's so multifaceted. And if, I tell them if they want to see if I'm right or wrong, well, after a class, when they're walking across campus, wink at everyone they pass. And they all start snickering because they know. They know if you wink at everyone you pass, you're going to have all kinds of different reactions that come up, because it could mean I'm flirting with you. I know something you don't. It could mean that I'm up to no good. It could mean a whole bunch of different things that we just kind of don't think too much about in the moment until we actually start doing it, and then people start wondering what we mean. So oculics, how do we speak with our eyes? The next thing is something that's a little bit also related with that too, and that's the physiological nonverbal communication. Now you're thinking, what do you mean physiological? Well, again, how our bodies respond and react to certain situations. Perfect example of that is blushing. If I want someone to blush and I say something to them that's either embarrassing or maybe you say something romantic or something like that, and they get all flushed in the face. Or they get angry, they get all flushed, you can just tell they're getting really angry, or they're scared and they get pale, or whatever the thing happens to be. You can tell just by that kind of simple physiological response, the body doing its thing in response to what's going on. Sweating, like when people are getting interrogated, they're paying attention to like the person, they sweating, and if they're totally cool and calm and they're feeling no threat, why would you start sweating? But as soon as people start sweating, either you got physical exertion going on or some kind of nervous fight or flight response kicking in. And that's a physiological thing that you can't control. It just starts happening on its own. So you have those kind of things, even things like tearing up. You start, you're watching a sad movie and your body starts reacting. You're tearing up. Like, why am I crying? It's just a movie, but it's your body responding physiologically. So that's another way that we can do, just again, it's nonverbal. So I can see like, oh, you're sad or whatever, or maybe they're happy tears, whatever. But we can tell those too, right? I mean, we can tell when somebody's crying because they're happy versus crying when they're sad. So it's one thing to wrestle with. Another one, and this one's also related because it's coming from the face, and that's vocalics. And some people call it paralinguistics, alongside of, so alongside language. So when you think of the way that I use my voice, this is the one that we typically don't think too much of when we're talking about nonverbal communication, because you're thinking, if I'm talking, isn't that verbal? Well, the truth of the matter is yes and no, because, for example, if I take two words, nice hair. Now you might be thinking, oh wow, he complimented me on my hair. I could also say, nice hair. Whoa, wait a minute, now you're insulting me. Again, it's one of those things that the vocal communication is nice hair. I've got two words. It's just simple, nice hair, two words, easy. How did I say those two words? I can use it as a compliment, nice hair. Or I can use it as an insult by being sarcastic, nice hair. And you can tell the difference. So again, how we use our voice really affects communication. So again, the verbal communication is just simply the words. The nonverbal is all the meaning that gets basted over it. If you think like basting food with a big barbecue brush, that's what we're talking about, how it can change what I mean. How we raise our voice when we get angry, and how we get real sad when we get, how we get somber and soft when we get sad, and how you can tell we're excited and things like that. You can tell that by our vocalics, how we tend to use our language. Again, as I said, some people call it paralinguistics because it goes alongside of the actual words. So how do you use your voice? And you can tell when someone when you're growing up, when mom calls your name, you know that this is just a hey, come in here, or a hey, get in here. And you know which one's which, and you can tell. Just like when you pick up the phone and someone's calling you, you can tell right away, are they happy, are they sad? Because again, it's the coding that's going along with it, that you can hear those speech codes and understand that this person's kind of has some kind of issues going on. So again, that is the idea of vocalics. It's what's coming alongside the language and changing the way we think of it. The next one I talk about, this one's always a little more sensitive because we take a lot of pride in our appearance. So how do we appear? Well, it could be something as simple as in like, hey, I'm wearing a sweater today, or I've dressed up and I'm wearing a suit and tie, or I'm just wearing a t-shirt, or whatever. I'm wearing a t-shirt with stains on it. You can have all kinds of different ways. I mean, look at even basic things like our accessories, like glasses. I mean, you go to an optometrist and there's a bazillion different frames on the wall. Why? Because we're not just happy with one kind. One kind, that's it. That's what you get. I want all the different versions, and I can sit there for the next hour trying on different glasses and seeing which ones I like. Jewelry, how we adorn ourselves with jewelry, or makeup, or piercings, or tattoos. Those things all carry a lot of linguistic, paralinguistic weight to it, because again, we're talking about the idea of they speak without you even saying a word. So, the appearance, making that first impression, we talk about that kind of thing. Well, here I am. Did I dress appropriately for my job interview, or do I look like a bum? And it can really carry a lot of weight for people, or kind of turn people off. You show up on that first date, looking dapper, then good job. You show up looking like you didn't care, not such a good job. You're leaving a terrible impression for that moment. So you can see how that kind of stuff matters. But it's also more than that too. When it comes to our body language, it's also, you think about things like posture. Am I sitting up very straight? Am I slouching? You think of all those things. Am I leaning forward? Am I just like hanging back and relaxing, lounging? That stuff matters. Also, my physical appearance. Do I have a chiseled jawline? If I have strong shoulders? Am I triangular shaped, or am I circle shaped, or am I pear shaped, or whatever? You think of how much time and effort we put into exercise, going to the gym, or things like that, because, well, we're concerned about our body appearance and what it speaks to people. And it does. It speaks all kinds of different things. It says, I live my life a certain way, and you can tell by the way I'm shaped. And people, of course, wrestle with this one because no one likes to be stereotyped and pigeonholed, and everyone is typically really sensitive about their weight. So we typically don't talk too much about that one. We just quickly scoot past it. But it's a way that we communicate. We communicate things to loved ones, to friends, to a significant other, by the way that we take care of ourselves, and we communicate that, through our nonverbal cues, through our body language. Other thing when it comes to body appearance, is the idea of body language itself. When you think of body language, I think of especially like these guys. Like, as you watch my videos, I use a lot of hand movements. I try not to go crazy with them, but it's also one of those things that I typically do. I mean, I use them, and we have different ways of using our hands, and also the way that we kind of position ourselves and speak in such a way. You can tell if someone is domineering versus someone being more, laid back in the way that they carry themselves, just by the way that they carry themselves. When I walk, I try to walk like I'm confident, like I know what I'm doing, and I find it, typically things work out well that way. And you can tell when somebody is like shuffling along that they're either sad, or maybe they're lazy, or whatever they're doing, just by the way their shoulders are maybe hanging down, or their head's hanging down, and you can tell that kind of a thing. But the big thing again is hands, and you probably never think about how much you use your hands. When I'm teaching public speaking, I'm always watching things for body language to see if they're doing anything normal or something distracting. And people always ask, well, what do I do with my hands? So do I stick them in my pocket? Do I hold on to the podium? What do I do with my hands? And our hands almost always give away our level of nervousness, because you'll see students hang on to the podium and they'll start gripping it for dear life. and their knuckles will start turning all white because they're terrified, and they show that with their hands. Or they'll put them in their pocket to try to do things, and then next thing they start like rocking because they're in their pocket and their body wants to move, so they start doing this while they're giving their speeches. And it's kind of funny to watch, but it's also one of those things that just shows how much we use our hands. So, that's a thing that we need to be thinking of. Another thing that comes into play is the concept of proxemics, which you could probably hear in that word, the prox part. So the proximity between people. And you think how much space you appreciate to have between people. And this is not just a human thing, it's actually a cultural thing. There are some cultures where people get really close to each other when they talk, and there's some cultures where they want a lot of distance when they're talking. And it could also be a personal thing. Like, I like people. I don't mind crowds. I don't like being shoved into place and moving about. Like if I go to the county fair and I'm kind of like trying to get through the crowd, I'm not a fan of that, mostly because I don't like my way impeded. I like to be able to walk freely. But if I'm in a place that has a lot of people, like some kind of social gathering, I'm not bothered. Some people don't like that many people around them, and that's their own personal preference. But when it comes to proximity, how close is too close? I mean, there are people out there who are very huggy. They love to hug and hug and hug. And it doesn't matter how well or how little they know them. They love hugging. And some people are like, I will hug you, but only if you are a very close, intimate person, a significant other, a very close family member, a very close friend. Everyone else is more an arm's length. And we all have those different kind of ideas and perceptions of how close is too close because, what do you personally prefer? But that's the idea of proxemics. And it's also tied to the concept of territory too. So if you ever walk your dog out in the neighborhood and they're peeing on every tree, it's not that they have to go to the bathroom that badly. It's that they're marking their territory. This block is mine. So when neighboring dogs come through, they smell the tree and go, oh, this place is taken. Or they challenge for that territory. Well, humans are the same way. We have our territory. So like if we, growing up, you had your own room as a kid and you put a sign on the door saying, my room, stay out. Well, you're marking your territory, and you're letting people know that this is my personal area. You're not to be in it. And we do that quite freely. Like we'll sit down at like the airport and we'll put a bag next to us, meaning don't sit next to me. Or we'll do other things like that. We'll spread our arms out or our legs out just to block areas to keep. It's not that we're just like trying to puff ourselves up. It's just that we're trying to like cordon off an area and say, this is my territory, please stay out of it. And we tend to really focus on that when people start getting close. We don't think too much of it when people are afar minding their business, but we care once they start getting close. Then from there, we also have the concept, and one of my favorite things is haptics. Haptics is a concept of touch. So when you think of like, again, using our hands for nonverbal communication, but there's also touch. Like I'm a handshake kind of guy. I like shaking hands. That's a touch thing. But everyone knows that when it's time to shake hands, they're always thinking about it. Like, okay, do I come in at a slight angle or do I come straight in? How do I grab the other person's hand? If I grab it back here, it's kind of like holding a fish and that's weird. If I grab it too far, that's definitely weird. Do I lock webs and then firmly? Do I give a little bit of a twist? Do I pull while I'm shaking? Well, what do I do with these things? How hard do I squeeze? We think of those kind of things, but that's not all of it too. I mean, obviously, I mentioned hugging before. Hugging is very much haptic. A haptic. You can talk about patting people on the back. There's a good job, and there's an I'm sorry. Like if someone has like a loss, that's very common for us to hold them on maybe even put the hand on the shoulder and say, I'm sorry for your loss. You don't slap them on the back, hey, I'm sorry, but as opposed to good job, that's different. You don't say good job, and we kind of have that wrestling point of, well, how much is too much when it comes to haptics, because, well, sometimes we just don't like to be touched, and some people love to touch, and it could be varied. But then it's also a way that we also show affection. If you have a significant other, you touch them, and if you don't, that's a red flag. So you see that kind of thing coming into play with haptics. And so then we think of things like high fives and fist bumps, or during COVID, we did that stupid elbow bump thing that no one really liked to do because it doesn't make sense. So, because actually your face gets closer to somebody when you're elbow bumping, so why would you do that? This is so much safer, but whatever. That's all past us now. So those are just some basic areas that I want us to think about when it comes to the idea of nonverbal communication. And why? Between 70 and 90% of our communication is nonverbal because, again, the actual words, that's the verbal comm. The rest of it is nonverbal comm. And so that's the overwhelming majority of what we do. So that's our basic overview of the different kinds. So when you're out and about, pay attention, not just to yourself, but to other people. See what they do. And it's kind of interesting and fun to watch other people do nonverbal things. But be aware, you're probably doing the same things too. So if you're making fun of someone else's nonverbal, keep in mind, you do a lot of stuff and most people don't know the things that they do. So pay attention to yourself when you're out doing those things and see, how am I acting? How am I showing things? Am I using my hands too much? Am I leaning? What am I doing? And it's kind of fun to watch that. So thank you very much for tuning in today. As always, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. If you didn't like what you heard, thank you very much for hanging out this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.